Thanks very much for the opportunity. I have this kind of strange title of Education 3.0, and I hope that the reason for that will become clear as I go along. Can you see that? It's a bit dark, right? Can we dim the lights? The reason I decided to take this view is so that we could perhaps see what the near and slightly further future might hold in store for a higher education institution, using some insights into where the cutting edge is in this area at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to talk about coevolution of technology and society and how that is or is not affecting education. And I think coming from a biology background, that seems like an appropriate concept, because coevolution happens quite often in natural systems where one organism adapts to the characteristics of another and so on. And it is this kind of cooperation-driven evolution that is probably more important than the kind of competition-driven evolution that people often think about when they think about evolution. So coevolution of technology and society, I'm really talking about changes in society and culture that are triggered by the changes that the technology that we create make. So it's not technology creating us, it's us creating technology and us then doing things in society that respond to the opportunities that the technology creates. And there are a number of examples. For example, the invention of the electric light meant that people could do things at night that they couldn't otherwise do, which led to all sorts of changes in the way in which our society behaves. And as we engage in those changes, so the technology changes and adapts accordingly. The use of phones changed how we communicate, led to the evolution of mobile phones, and so on. I won't go through all of those examples. Now let's think about why universities are the way they are, at least why they're physical entities structured around the kinds of things that we tend to associate with universities. And the reason for that is actually scarcity. Scarcity is a very, very important key driver in institutions, and because books and other knowledge resources traditionally, historically have been scarce, knowledgeable people, professors, have been scarce. The other kinds of resources that we need for teaching, laboratories, and all of those things have been scarce, so we aggregate them, and we aggregate them into bricks and mortar institutions, organizations that have distinct physical boundaries and have a distinct sense of place. What this does is it creates an aggregation of demand. If we imagine a graph of the number of students versus the number of courses, it aggregates demand into a relatively small number of courses that sit in the head of this long tail distribution. And there is a long tail of unrealized opportunities that can't be realized by virtue of the fact of the physical nature of institutions. One of the consequences of this kind of organization is that institutions tend to behave as island states. They tend to say, we have to do everything, and we have to have everything within our borders. And a little bit of cooperation happens, but mostly we tend to focus on what happens internally in our borders. If you think of the long tail distribution, that means that a lot of opportunities go unrealized, and in a connected world, this kind of strong sense of physical location, physical place, might not be the right model for a connected world. So what if we could live in a world where scarcity wasn't the key driver? It will always be a driver, of course, but what if it wasn't the key driver? What if we could live in a world where technology mediates success that depends, instead of going to a particular necessarily physical location or only going to a physical location, what if we could live in a world where technology mediates success that depends on collaboration? And it's this kind of idea that Philip Smith and I were tossing around a couple of years ago that led us to write a paper, which we published in the online journal First Monday. And in this paper, we tried to define what some of the characteristics of this kind of new world of more porous institutions might look like. And this has generated quite a lot of interest. I saw recently, I Google alert every time somebody mentions Education 3.0, and I saw that the president of EDUCAUSE gave a keynote a week or so ago and mentioned Education 3.0 and attributed it to John C. Lee Brown. So I chased the presentation of John C. Lee Brown and discovered that he had actually copied the stuff from our presentation, which is all good. It's not a bad thing. It means that the ideas are getting out there and people are beginning to use them. So let's have a look. Of course, the point is that we're talking about something which is emerging. It's not here yet. At best, those institutions that are currently at the cutting edge of technology in education are probably more Education 2.0 than Education 3.0. So we're really looking at somewhere where we're beginning now, we're not yet there. And if you think about how technology has changed all sorts of other industries besides higher education, education is really the final frontier of technology. Technology has radically changed banking. It's radically changed the automotive industry. It's radically changed winemaking. It's radically changed international sales of products. Almost every industry in the world has been radically changed by technology, but education, much less so. So some of the characteristics of Education 3.0 is one of them relates to the kinds of choices that students make. And instead of necessarily making choices about institutions, they make choices about what it is that they want to do, and it may involve things that are done in the long tail of the curve. They make their choices based on their perceptions of credibility, which I can guarantee you in the 21st century are almost certainly not the same kinds of things that we considered when we went to university as being what makes an institution credible. There is also a focus on reusable learning content. There is a whole lot of wealth of educational resources that are being created by organizations, by institutions, and by individuals and by communities that are beginning to find their way into the learning mix. And some of that reusable learning content is created by the students themselves as they go about their learning. Some of it is, of course, still institutional based. We're still at the beginning of this age, focusing on institutional creation of content. Then there is how we recognize the learning that has been achieved. Nowadays, a student comes and sits in a class for a while, writes an exam, and at the end of that, we give them something that says that they've participated in this class. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've learned a lot. It just means that they've participated and they've been able to achieve the goals of whatever assessment strategy is in use. Recognition of learning achieved might arise out of recognition of prior learning, which is the technique of looking at the kinds of characteristics, the learning characteristics that people bring with them when they come into a learning situation where they may not have had come from a formal education background. And that can easily be adapted, and we're looking at that at the moment with our Lifelong Learning Division for Lifelong Learning at UWC, seeing how we might be able to take the ideas out of recognition of prior learning and actually create something which has got more general applicability. And then there is the whole notion of collaboration, and I think it was mentioned my interest in collaboration, and I think that collaboration is a way for us to do a whole lot of things that we could otherwise not do because of the lack of critical mass, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Collaboration that's cross-institutional, so collaboration that's decentralized, in other words, people collaborate rather than institutions. Collaboration that is entirely got nothing to do with institutions, and collaboration that is institutional. Now I'm going to come to some of those things in a minute. So essentially what I'm saying is that we're looking at a fundamental state change in education. And it's easy for us, given our current situation in South Africa and Africa generally with respect to technology, and especially with respect to the high cost of bandwidth and the relatively low penetration of technology into the home, not to see this. But if you really look at the world globally, you will see that what is happening is that there's a fundamental state change happening from individuals to community. People are participating much more in online and partially online communities. People are moving a lot more from information to how they communicate about information. There is a change of state happening from people being teachers to students and teachers being together explorers. There is a strong movement away from physical location towards context, because physical location is actually an accident of geography. Context actually helps us understand. There is a movement away from aggregation to more dispersed ways of doing things. When I started at UWC, and I gave my first classes that made use of computers, most everybody was a techno-newbie. Nowadays, people are coming into universities, even from backgrounds that we wouldn't traditionally associate with being techno-savvy, and they already know how to do many of the things that we had to teach 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. There's a whole lot of things that are happening that I call going from single-threaded to multi-threaded. Courses that run across institutions, courses that incorporate components that are not institutional, and so on. And there's a tendency for technology to move people from being producers to being both producers and consumers at the same time. Another interesting change is the tendency to move from attending to attuning. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you think that people are in the room, so they're attending, so they're participating, and so they're actively involved in the process, whereas they may not be attuned. So one of the things I always do with me is I always carry a little recording device in my pocket, and I record my talks. So I'll be recording this one, and it will be online. And what that enables is that people who want to find out what I talked about can do so, even if they weren't in the room. They can attune to what I had to say. Someone who was here but lost a train of thought might wonder, what the heck did he say? Might be able to go back and pick it up. But interestingly, there's a tendency for people to be able to do things at the same time. So when I first started taking my computer to council meetings, for example, I was looked at very strangely. And I was told, you should actually focus on what's happening. But the majority of the people in the room are doing the same thing I'm doing. It's only that I have an obvious vehicle to enable me to attend and to attune where necessary, but also I can attune to other things, and nothing is lost in the process. And this is what's happening with young people as they come into the university. They're able to do multiple things. They can attune without necessarily attending. And sometimes we hear students didn't attend class. But the fact that they weren't in class doesn't necessarily, in this Education 3.0 world, mean that they were not attuned to what's happening in the class. So there is this tendency. And then we also come from a world where trust is authoritative, where the big institutions and organizations are the sources of trust. Nowadays, we're moving into a world where trust is triangular, where you find out from your neighbors, from your friends, from people with a common interest, where's the best place to do something. And so trust is no longer solely authoritative. Of course, none of this stuff is absolute. So we're seeing that the learning processes, content, and technologies begin to cross institutional boundaries. And so we move from a kind of brick wall model of an institution to a more semi-permeable membrane of an institution. Okay, now to the technology bit. So what enables all of this, and what are some of the drivers? So we can look at it from three perspectives. Obviously, at the center of it is the technology components. There are also knowledge components, and then there is a framework, a global framework of collaboration that's both individual and institutional that's making this happen. So start from the bottom rather than from the technology. Although it's difficult to talk about some of this stuff without including the technology, I'll try. But one of the things is something that Tim O'Reilly, who I had the privilege of meeting last week, called Web 2.0. He coined this term to talk about a whole lot of technologies that changed, sort of more or less changed the way the web worked. And so how many people here know about Facebook? How many people use Facebook? It's interesting. How about Flickr? How many people have heard of Flickr? How many people have photographs on Flickr? This is my page on Flickr with the photographs from the conference we were at last week in Portland, Oregon, which were mostly posted fairly live from the conference, and then enabled in my webpage on my blog. How about LinkedIn? Who's got a profile on LinkedIn? I keep getting messages from people who I haven't seen or heard from in years, asking me to add them to as a friend on LinkedIn. That's another one of these social networking. How about Twitter? I tell you, if you really want to understand how this stuff works, have a look at Twitter. So, on my blog on dkeats.com, I have a little box that allows me to post to Twitter. When it's posted to Twitter, it appears on my Facebook profile. It also goes into my Friendster feed, and it automatically appears on my blog. And several of the people that are interested in what I'm doing actually have subscribed to, for some reason, don't ask me why, subscribed to my Twitter feed on their cell phone. So if I post something there, like finally got some sleep, they actually get a message on their cell phone. Isn't that weird? But that's the way this technology is unfolding, and it's actually connecting people. It's not just about the technology; it's connecting people. So this guy Ramrith here, I met him last week in Corvallis, Oregon. We visited the open source lab. We went out to dinner, and people were talking about Twitter, and he said, "Oh, I use Twitter." And I said, "Oh, I use Twitter." And then it became a race between the two of us to see which one of us would add the other one first. I won because I got back to my hotel before he got home. So that's kind of the social networking, kind of the Web 2.0. It's the read-write web. The Web 1 was you posted the document on the web. It was kind of like publishing, except instead of publishing it on paper, you published it on the web. Nowadays, the web has become much more of a two-way thing. And a lot of the content is actually generated through process. So if you want to understand how to make an institution have a tremendous amount of presence on the internet, the first thing to do is to work out how to generate its institutional content through the normal course of the processes that it's engaged in, as opposed to having to go through the publishing model where you write something, you edit it, and you put it up on the web. And that's an interesting change. But there's a whole lot of other stuff: the social network, blogging, video conferencing, podcasting. How many people do podcasting? So my talk will be podcast. If I feel like it, I will also synchronize the audio track with the slides, and I will slidecast it on another social networking service called SlideShare, which allows me to then cut and paste it into my blog, which will automatically generate a Twitter message for the people that are following me on Twitter to let them know that I've actually posted my presentation. So you see how it goes. It's generating, in the normal course of what I do, a tremendous amount of content with only me having to do a little tiny bit extra. So then there's mashups, social bookmarking, all of those kinds of things. Widgets are a big thing nowadays. So all of that is creating the framework within which individuals can collaborate. Whether the institutions want to do it or not, the individuals can still do the collaboration. I can still work with somebody in another institution on something that I'm doing in a course, which gives rise to the notion of the personal learning environment. Now, at the extreme, there is a school of thought that says universities have no reason to be. We can do all of this stuff without them, and that's the extreme view of the personal learning environment. I take a more middle of the road kind of view, in that what a personal learning environment should be is a way to use technology to bring together whatever it is you want to learn about and all of the activities that you can engage in order to learn it. And this is beginning to happen. I have a friend, David Wiley, who's the guy who founded the concept of open content. He opened his entire course via a wiki for other people to participate, even if they weren't actually taking the course for credit. And he got a tremendous response to that. People participating via the wiki in his course who had nothing to do with him, were not in his university, and were not taking the course for credit. And some of them actually went to their own professors in their own university and said, "Look, can I take this course as an elective credit? He will send the grade to you if you trust him." And that actually happened. Several people actually got credit for this course, but they took over the web. And so we're starting to see the emergence of a new way of thinking about learning. We all know about pedagogy. There's another term you should get to know, and that's autogogy. That's the way in which a person self-learns, and the way in which technology can be brought to bear on self-learning. Okay, I need to move a little bit quicker. So recognition of learning achieved, I talked about before. This is scary stuff for traditional institutions, because it means that the business model of bringing people into class, getting them to pay a fee, standing up in front of them and teaching them, and then assessing their something or the other, and then giving them a piece of paper actually goes out the window. But this is actually beginning to happen. So learning can happen informally or formally in the same institution. It can happen in another institution, and it can happen without institutional mediation. Now, that's the scary bit. So a real Education 3.0 institution will find a way to deal with that. Will find a way to be able to give accreditation for learning that takes place outside of the bricks and mortar walls of that institution. And then tailored programs of study. People can create their own programs of study by picking and choosing bits and pieces rather than choosing from predetermined programs of study. And then how do we recognize the learning that's achieved there? Okay, so now the technology components. I did talk a little bit about the technology, but you know, there's the big thing these days is social software. There's also the appearance on the scene of low-cost hardware. A lot of companies offering now services based on low-cost hardware. You can get pretty much an entire fairly sophisticated server for a few rands now, and rent it rather than buy it. You can even hire CPU cycles. You don't even have to buy the physical hardware or rent the physical hardware. You can just rent CPU cycles. Then there's a whole lot of technologies that go with the social software, commenting services, Flash, style sheets, software as a service. That's what I just mentioned. Ajax, the use of tag clouds and creating taxonomies out of tag clouds. How many people have tagged something on the web? It's a tremendous way to add value to content. If you have a website, let's say it's the origin of humanity or something like that, and you want to add value to that, open it up for tagging. Nothing that you can do will create more value to that existing resource than opening it up for tagging. Then there's the specific technologies. There's YouTube for sharing videos, blogging. There's Facebook, which we just looked at. There's SlideShare, where you can share presentations. In fact, we have a site at UWC which we call Chameleon, where you can upload a presentation in any format. It will convert it for you to all the other formats, give you an online interface. You can tag it, mark it up. There's a whole lot of things that you can do, and we're able to do that because of this project that we call Chisimba, which I'll just mention quickly because I have to move on. Then there's Enterprise 2.0. This scares the pants off of IT people. The whole notion that your enterprise is not contained. It's not contained within the data center. It's not contained behind the firewall. But Enterprise 2.0 is here, and it's here in a massively big way. We're talking about rich internet applications, software as a service. As I said, you can hire and hardware as a service. As I said, you can hire CPU cycles. Amazon has a service called S3, where you can just hire CPU cycles and pay for what you get. I tried this out. I wrote an application to run on S3 over the Christmas holidays because I broke my ribs and I was stuck in the house. So what do you do when you're stuck in the house, right? You write some software application. And I ran it just to test all of this stuff out. And I got a bill from Amazon for 7 cents. Because that's all the CPU cycles I use. 7 cents worth. Software as a service. Google is one of the big players in this space. Google now offers you their entire application suite, which you can run as a service, including email, and it's free. So you pay with a little bit of spam tagged onto the bottom of every message, or if you open the document interface, a little bit of advertising that's there. And this is becoming very popular with universities. At the University of Western Cape, we're looking at getting rid of our email altogether because it adds a tremendous amount of overhead to what it costs to run the IT facilities, and it doesn't give us any additional value whatsoever. So that's an interesting one. So the enterprise becomes porous. Okay, I'll just mention briefly Chisemba, and then I think I'll try to move on to the end. Chisemba is our software that we developed collaboratively at the University of Western Cape in collaboration with 13 other African universities, as well as some universities in North America and some organizations in Europe, and the higher education, some of the higher education institutions in Afghanistan. And this is the network that this is a good example of collaboration, non-structural collaboration. It's not the institutions per se collaborating, but it's the individual people collaborating in order to make something happen at the institutional level. That works much better than structural collaboration. Structural collaboration tends to eat a lot of money and doesn't really deliver very much. So e-learning is one of the spaces that we're very active in, and at the University of the Western Cape, all of our e-learning stuff runs on this platform. But it's not only e-learning. We have also, this is the portal of the University of the Western Cape running on the same application framework. As you can see, it's rather different from e-learning. But what it means is that we can operate this open-ended framework, which has got external APIs, can talk to all these outside services, can be consumed by outside services using the same technology. So you don't have to learn one and then learn another one and then learn another one and then learn another one. This software connects as the back end or the front end to almost anything. Okay, moving on quickly to the knowledge component. The availability of free and open source software is obviously one of the key areas of, and I've put this under knowledge components rather than technology, because access to the software and access to the source code of the software is actually something that has given rise to other things. And it is also something which is a source of study. Then there is things like Creative Commons and related licenses that enable people to make content and share it without having to worry about the vagaries of copyright in this country or that country, or whether somebody should be allowed to share it or shouldn't be allowed to share it. You can decide which of your copyright, all rights reserved, you want to give away, and license your content accordingly. And then you're starting to see a whole mass of material developing as a consequence of having the software, having the licenses, and having the community to create it. And then, of course, there are also some international standards and specifications. 4 weeks ago, I was in the United States at the IMS consortium meeting where we're looking at learning tool interoperability standards, and IMS is one of the strong players in that space. At UWC, we have a free and open courseware strategy, which says basically all of our courses should be available under one of those Creative Commons attribution share-alike licenses, and hopefully, as we move into implementing the latest version of this software, by January, all courses will not only be available, but they will be automatically available once they're created online. So you'll be able to go to the free courseware site and pick up a copy of any of the courses that people have created. Of course, if they haven't created them, they won't be there. But that will happen automatically. The learning management system will generate the packages, will put them onto the repository and make them available. We also are doing a low-cost podcast project, which is also going to be generating content. So like I'm doing here with my iPod in my pocket, we have these triple C PCs. Any of these low-cost devices can be used. We've written some software to run on it, and the lecturer can take it into the classroom, plug in a wireless microphone, give the lecture. At the end, just click publish, and it automatically gets published into the course and is available within a few minutes to the students who may have been attending but may not have been a student. So this is kind of a map of some of the things that we're doing at UWC to try and kind of move into this space. Most of the stuff is still fairly early. We're looking at doing we already have been doing some podcasting with the lecturers and with the students, but it has been based on devices, and it's been based on manually editing files and then uploading them, and that's actually an impediment. So we're trying to shorten down that process. But we've got a lot of projects that are running that are focusing on trying to figure out how we can move into this space, how we can be a more Education 3.0 kind of organization. How Education 3.0 is this, I wonder. I don't have an answer, but when I looked at the Webometrics ranking of universities, I see that WITS comes out fifth in Africa in terms of Webometrics, which is largely based on measuring content and links to content. And it's mostly static stuff. And when I Google around for kind of Web 2 kinds of things, I don't find very many. So I think probably, although this is fairly high up in the Webometrics rankings, it's mostly based on static content. So there's some opportunities there to do some really fun things, I think. So, if education is the final frontier, and there is this co-evolution of technology and society, where is education in relation to it? I would say right now it's kind of a little bubble off to the side of this cycle. Even in the United States, where this stuff is pervasive, the degree of penetration into institutions is still relatively small. So we actually have an opportunity to do catch-up. And I think this is an opportunity for Africa. If we can get ourselves into the mindset of collaboration and into the mindset that the only way for us to build the kind of critical mass that exists in North America and Europe is through collaboration. We can't do it any other way. There isn't enough money to actually go out and replicate the Stanfords and the MITs. We've got to do it through collaboration. We have to create virtual Stanfords and virtual MITs. And collaboration is the only way to do it. And we can do that. We can bring this little circle into the big circle. And I think we can leapfrog as a consequence of the fact that we've been held back mostly by the lack of bandwidth and by the high cost of technology relative to incomes. So that's all I have to say. I wanted to just kind of give you a sense of where I think the evolution of technology, society, and education is taking us, where I think the future lies, but it only lies there, of course, if we choose to go there. We can also choose to go back, we can also choose to remain static, we can also choose to go in a different direction. But I think this is an exciting space to be in, and I think there are a lot of opportunities. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions if there's time.